Good evening, everybody, and happy Memorial Day. Welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. Um, I am happy to be here as always. We're going to be continuing for every other week through June. In July, just to warn everybody, there's going to be a shift somewhere around the middle of July, just kind of skipping a week because I have a conference to go to, so I won't be available at that point. But it's good to see folks here. First thing I want to say, since I see he's here, Lapaka Kaponui is with us, Mysteries of Hawaii. I know that you just published a novel. You and your wife, Tanya, just published a new novel. Might want to pop that in. I just ordered it on Amazon. I'll have it in a couple of days. Looking forward to reading it. Go ahead and post the title of that and maybe even a link to the Amazon book. So for anyone else who happens to be an author, feel free to let me know what your books are. I'm happy to also always see that. Also, I should say that Mysteries of Hawaii, Lapaka actually has several other books about Hawaiian paranormal supernatural activity. So take a look. I've got his books. All right. Glad that, Frank, good to see you here. For the first time, I actually have gotten a couple of emails from people asking me to cover topics. So before we get into any questions or topics that folks have here who are present with us, let me start with one that I got from one of my students at the Rhine Education Center a couple days ago. So she was wondering about spirit hitchhikers, and not the kind of spirit hitchhikers that are hitchhiking ghosts. That's a whole different category out there, which we can talk about it either tonight or some other time. But she was mentioning the kind of spirits that might, if you go to a haunted place, and somebody kind of hitches a ride with you back to your house and is there with you. So she wanted really me to comment on that. I know that when I talk to ghost hunters, they often ask me, aren't you worried about spirits following you home? Or, how do you protect yourself? All of those things so that doesn't happen. Well, first thing I got to tell you is that I don't do any sort of protection rituals or anything else when I go to any investigations, haunted places. I'm more concerned about the living. I'm not concerned about the dead at all, honestly. There's just some simple things you can do. The thing to remember is as living people, we have more power than deceased people do because we have a body kind of feeding our consciousness, not just our consciousness in that way. As far as folks following me home, I'm not terribly sensitive to spirits, except for a couple of them. I mean, I've had my experiences here and there, but I'm not really worried about that for a number of reasons. Number one, when you go to a place that has got a reputation and stories, so much of what I see on television, so many of other things, there's potential folklore that's there that may not actually be spirits. In fact, I think that ghost hunters should be actually worried about whether or not the EVPs they're getting are actually from a spirit of the place. In other words, somebody who's a resident at the location, or whether some spirits have decided to jump in to the building because they know that ghost hunters are there trying to communicate with somebody. This is something I've had discussions with psychics about a number of times, psychics and mediums. In fact, my late colleague, Annette Martin, who was my field investigation partner. She was an incredible psychic medium. Very often, before we would go into a house, a residential place, or someplace else, she would stand outside for a few moments and either mentally, or she eventually started doing it out loud for my benefit, would just basically put out the word that anybody in the area who's decided to come and talk to me while I'm investigating this case, please stay outside. I will talk to you afterwards. She and other psychics and mediums I've talked to felt that as soon as they kind of turn on their ability to communicate or to even sense spirits in a location, because it's not always on, it's almost like putting a searchlight out, in those ceremonial openings of big stores or a movie or something like that. So suddenly there is this idea that there's somebody here to talk to, and they might come from miles away, is what Annette would say. So she would actually tell them to stay outside. And occasionally she told me that sometimes they followed her home because she didn't have the time to talk to them at that point. When she communicated with them, they left. In my case, if there's anybody that's been following me, and there's never been an indication of all but one, I will say, that has done that, I'm not too worried about that. And again, I'll talk a little bit about this idea of protection if you want in a moment. The one ghost that has followed me has been the blue lady, who we know as Kate from the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant. She has actually followed me to other locations on occasion. I don't think she's come to the house too often, but she's been at a couple of conferences. She's been seen by other people while I'm speaking about the place from time to time. The student who sent this to me was concerned about spirits kind of following you home. Generally, if that happens, it's because they want to talk or they want communication. They want acknowledgement in some way. So she was also concerned about or asking how long they would stay. That all depends on the ghost, of course. But there are ways that you can just simply kind of end the communication or tell them to go somebody else. It's not much. I mean, you don't have to do too much. Remember that ghosts are people too, but they're dead. Tina is saying, why are they termed hitchhikers instead of stowaways? That's a good point. I think that if they hitched a ride on a boat, they'd be stowaways, or a plane. But if they hitched a ride in a car, they'd be hitchhikers. I'm not sure where the phrase spirit hitchhikers came from for the kind of thing I'm talking about. I assume it's because they're hitching an attachment to you for a time being. Probably from somebody in the ghost hunting world, possibly one of the TV shows. They've made up a whole bunch of terms in general. So if anybody's concerned about that, there's a very, very simple technique you can use. It's something I learned from and kind of modified a little bit here and there from Alex Tanis, who I worked with back in my old ASPR days. I've spoken to other psychics about it. It's a very general technique. It's something that's been used by parapsychologists with people who, in one case, it was used by a parapsychologist psychiatrist who was working with patients in a psychiatric facility who were hearing voices and actually getting real information from some of the staff that was freaking the staff out. And it's just a visualization technique. It's just imagining a force field around yourself, a bubble around yourself, light around yourself. I know psychics talk about white light or something like that. One psychic called it clear light. Just think about being a protective bubble. However, one of the things that doesn't always work is people kind of imagine a bubble. They don't put the intention of what it's for as part of that. And that's really an important thing as well. Echo Bodine, a really well-known psychic who's written some great books over the years. Look her up. Echo, like it sounds, Bodine. If you can find a book called Relax, It's Only a Ghost, I highly recommend that. And she actually suggested putting mirrors around you. Just spend a couple of minutes imagining this bubble around you and imagine things hitting the bubble, and even putting mirrors, physical mirrors around you as a reminder that things will reflect back. So you don't have to worry about psychic stuff coming at you. It's also a way to remove a spirit, it seems. You can actually put the bubble around a spirit that's bothering you in your mind and move that bubble outside. And that has worked actually for people to get rid of ghosts sometimes. I guess it all depends on whether the ghost is persistent, comes back again. Okay, hitchhiking ghosts, yes, from the Haunted Mansion. So ghostly hitchhikers, I think one of the most famous ghostly hitchhiking cases is Resurrection Mary in Chicago. A woman who is picked up, the story goes, the woman is picked up by someone. She's hitchhiking. She's picked up by, somebody in a car. And as they drive by the cemetery, which is her final destination, apparently where she's buried, she disappears from the car. People have reported that over the years. Whether that's real or not, it's hard to say. But, people have seen the woman walking around the cemetery, which is pretty rare. Cemeteries are the least likely places to be haunted in general. So there are hitchhiking ghosts. There are a couple books on hitchhiking ghosts you can find. And one of my colleagues years ago, Carrie Gaynor, decided to do some historical research on the idea of a hitchhiking ghost and found stories in historical literature of hitchhiking ghosts well before the automobile, so coaches and things like that, and also even found an account in a translation of Roman writings from the Roman Empire, of a hitchhiking ghost who hitchhiked a ride on a chariot and then disappeared from the chariot at some point. I guess, though, the charioteer could have hit a rock and maybe the person got bumped out, but that's the earliest one he was able to find. And yet, and of course, there are the hitchhiking ghosts from the Haunted Mansion, who are the coolest ghosts, of course. All right, that's the first thing I'll talk about. If anybody has questions about what I just talked about, feel free to ask. Mariah says, I find they like making sure you get home okay, then they leave. Plus, they enjoy the car ride. Absolutely. You know, if you treat, this is the one thing that bugs the hell out of me on TV, is how many of those shows the ghost hunters are yelling or treating what may or may not even be there, or who may or may not even be there. They're not treating them nicely. You know, they are provoking or yelling or whatever else because they're trying to get a response, a reaction. And of course, then they complain because, or run scared because they get a negative reaction. Well, if you yell at somebody, you're probably going to get a negative reaction. They're likely not to follow you home as well. What about parasitic ghosts? Oh, the book name again. So was that the Hitchhiking Ghost book? So there's a book called Hitchhiking Ghosts, if that's the one you're talking about for that one, a particular thing. Echo's book is called Relax, It's Only a Ghost. That's Echo Bodine. All right, parasitic ghosts. Let's talk for a moment. All right, let me hit the second question there. Customs that pregnant women shouldn't visit cemeteries. Those are superstitions. That's all they are. You know, spirits, I want you all to think about this. You're dead. Body's rotting in the ground. Why in the world would you want to hang out in the cemetery? I mean, do you think there's a party going on or something like that? I mean, what's the purpose? What's the reason why you'd want to hang out there? I guess if you want to make sure that your grave stays clean and stuff, that's fine. But otherwise, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all. And we find only rare circumstances where the stories actually play out as accurate that there might actually be a ghost there, an apparition there. People will feel negative sadness, grief, and things like that. That would be a reason for someone possibly not to go to a cemetery, because the grief from mourners is there. It's going to be there. So people will pick that up. But the idea of ghosts being there, no. Parasitic ghosts, it depends on the culture, whether you believe in parasitic ghosts. So I will talk about here, since this kind of takes us off to another direction. There is the kind of person that some folks have called us either an emotional vampire or a psychic vampire. And we're talking about living people here. All right. So a psychic vampire is somebody who unconsciously, it's not a conscious thing, sucks all the life out of a room. And we've probably all met somebody in our past where we're having a nice, pleasant conversation. Maybe it's a party. Somebody comes in and either the way they're behaving drags everybody down, or just, you know, they're acting perfectly okay, but them being around for whatever reason, it's just like you feel tired, all the energy gets sucked out. That's something going on with their psychic ability. It's not an intentional thing. It can be protected against with that technique I just mentioned. But then there's also people who suck negative stuff out of spaces too. You know, we always think about people who suck the life out of a place, but there are the people who also just being around, for whatever reason, they're sucking the negative energy from people. People who are upset about something, people who are in grief, people who are having problems. Certain people just feed on that, and they actually can be very good listeners, and they let people process psychically. So you wouldn't want to protect against those people. So I would assume that there are also deceased people who are similar, not parasitic, but intentionally or otherwise, they're pulling or sucking positive emotions or sucking out negative emotions. It just feeds their own unconscious or spirit, whatever you want to call it in that sense. But that whole protection thing works really well with that, because you're really protecting against other psychic interactions by doing that. And don't forget that apparitions, ghosts, the only way they're communicating with us is psychically. The only way that they can see the world is psychically. They don't have physical senses. So what you're doing by closing yourself off psychically, even for a time with that bubble, will prevent not only spirits, but also this kind of emotional give and take kind of thing. Paul says, I drove past Resurrection Cemetery. Buddy claimed his friends picked up a hitchhiking ghost in Chicago. Okay. All right, let's see. Perfect portrayal psychic vampire, Colin Robinson. That's correct. What We Do in the Shadows. He is a psychic vampire. But he sucks the life out of things because of his boredom. I have to say that there are people who are not psychic vampires who are incredibly boring. Just their presence brings everybody down because of their behavior, nonverbal communication, not everybody who brings a party down is a psychic vampire. It's often a lot of nonverbal stuff. We can still call them that, but it's not. They're not getting anything out of it. Let's put it that way. And Colin Robinson's case on What We Do in the Shadows, that's how he feeds. That's not the case with most people who kind of have that interaction as well. Okay, so that's the first kind of brought us off into a different thing. And so hopefully, Caitlin, that answered your question. There are a lot of bizarre customs about ghosts and about cemeteries and about other places. Look at the superstitions that are there. You end up with all sorts of very unusual things. And as much as we like to believe that we are an advanced culture, we are definitely not. A lot of tribal behavior in politics and sports especially. A lot of superstition in sports fandom as well. All right, let's see here. Safina, have you ever worked with or no? Well, certainly I knew Bill Roll. I never worked with him on a case per se. We did do a couple of visits of a couple places, but I did know Bill Roll since he came and lectured when I was he came and lectured at John F. Kennedy University shortly after I went back to the university as a faculty member of our then graduate parapsychology program. I actually wrote an obituary about him for the Journal of Parapsychology. You'll find that on academia.edu, and participated in a memorial conference about him at the Rhine Center as well. Roll's kind of, in many respects, the father of our modern poltergeist recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis model, our model of the poltergeist. Although he was co-creator of that, and actually it came from a previous researcher named Nandor Fodor originally. But Roll did some really good work. He was not so much a proponent of survival of bodily death, especially towards the end, which I found pretty fascinating. You can go to the Psychical Research Foundation, look them up, psychicalresearchfoundation.org, I believe is the website. Brian Williams, who worked closely with Bill Roll, is kind of the person who's taken over. And you'll find a lot of Bill Roll's papers at the Psychical Research Foundation's website. So I do highly recommend that. His 1972 classic book, The Poltergeist, is, I believe, still back in print as of a couple of years ago. Okay, Paul, you agree with George Carlin, certain things, misses comedy shows. Of course, Carlin was a debunker. He didn't believe in life after death. Although I know one medium who claimed to communicate with him after he died. I think that anybody who was a total disbeliever and then starts communicating after death, one of the first things I might say is, I was a little surprised. I like Carlin as well. I think he was very, very funny. But there are a lot of people who are well known, especially in academia, although they're getting a little long in the tooth, many of them, who are total disbelievers in psychic phenomena, and sadly, they have read very little on the field. Carl Sagan was one, but Carl Sagan at least looked at some of the research and found certain things quite fascinating and said deserved actually more research. one of which was the Gonsfeld, which is a light sensory deprivation technique to put people into an altered state, and then some, and the quality of that research for ESP. Another was actually reincarnation, children who remember previous lives. That's still a big mystery. And there is very little reasonable explanation at all for some of these young, really young kids, especially if they have to have been thoroughly vetted. So kind of interesting. And it's interesting the skeptic, it may not be reincarnation, but it still deserves research as well. Shelley, high school, a mist fog rolling from my bedroom and underneath closed bath. Okay. So that was, it must have been a dream, I assume. Was that a dream that you had? I'm not quite clear whether that was a dream or something else, what was going on. You have to be a little clearer on that. I tell skeptics to look at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies for starters. That's a great place for people who are academics, I think. I don't know that too many people who are not academically oriented are going to go there right off the bat, but I think that's a good, certainly absolutely good starting point for anybody in general. All right, so, all right, Mr. Fog rolling. No clue. I can't even, I've never heard of something like that. It certainly doesn't seem like it was paranormal at all. So if she saw it, yeah, I couldn't tell you. Sorry. All right. Anybody else with a question? All right, I'll go ahead and move on. So Susanna had sent me an email just before I started today, wondering about something kind of interesting. So let's say you have a couple and the husband dies and 10 years later, the wife dies, right? In that 10 years, since the husband died, maybe she got remarried, she has new hobbies, started a new job, there's some changes. So she's not the same person basically she was when her husband died, the time her husband died. So now she dies and she meets her husband in the afterlife. She's clearly changed. Has he changed? And is he aware of the changes in her personality? I don't know for sure, but from what I hear from mediums in general, people continue to be, if they're here, in other words, if they haven't moved on to the other side, to the afterlife, they may still continue to change and learn new things. We see occasionally apparitions who are still here, who actually learn to do PK, in other words, mind over matter. It's pretty rare, but and it takes a while for them to learn how to do that. But that's something they have to learn how to do, and that some have learned how to do that. The ghost the apparition at the Moss Beach Distillery learned she could change her clothing, and over the years learned she could travel further and further. So there's clearly learning going on. I don't know exactly what happens once a spouse who's been deceased for a while meets the spouse that when he or she dies, and what kind of recognition there is. That's a question for some mediums I'll have to ask about. Okay, know anything about curses? Yeah, in fact, I'm teaching about curses in some of I just did a class, the week lecture this past week for my parapsychology and anthropology class. All right, curses. In general, curses are about the person who's being cursed. We have, and this is the same with psychic attack or anything like that, anything you want to call it like that. In general, we have unconscious shielding against a psychic opening, against getting too much information, against too much coming in. All right, that psychic protection bubble I talked about, which Frank, by the way, should be something you mentally refresh every so often. It doesn't take much to refresh it. Just keep refreshing it. But most people have protection. Most people already have that, except in cases where they've suddenly decided that they want to be more open or aware, or something goes on psychologically that opens them up. For curses, there's two elements. Number one, depending on what kind of curse you're talking about, there is no such thing as a gypsy curse. I'll just say that right off the bat. By their own belief systems. That may have changed with the New Age stuff, but if you look at the anthropologists and other people and books written by gypsies and we're talking about Romney gypsies, actual ethnic Rom gypsies, right? And gypsies not really, they're Romney people is what they are. The belief internally within the culture is that yes, they are psychic with each other, but not with other people. And the curses, when somebody tells you there's a curse on you, if you go to see a psychic or anybody else or fortune teller, get up and leave. No legitimate psychic practitioner will ever tell you there's a curse on you. They may say people don't like you and you're picking that up. They may say somebody's after your job because they're picking that up. But anyone who talks about the word curse and then follows that up with saying, I've got a remedy for you, and of course it's going to cost money, that's fraud. Absolute fraud. Curses in many cultures rely on two things, one more than the other. One is actually the victim knowing that there has been a curse levied on them. Because we do more damage to ourselves, especially if we're afraid of curses, afraid of that sort of thing, afraid of the supernatural, of spells levied on us. We will damage ourselves. We will hurt ourselves. This is why in many cultural practices relating to cursing, there is a physical indication. In other words, there's a way the victim is told that they've been cursed. I remember years ago when I was living in New York, there were some negative practitioners who were hired sometimes or just simply had it in for somebody, and they would nail a dead chicken to somebody's door. They were practitioners of either Santeria or voodoo, and they were on the negative side, which is a very, very small percentage of those practices. For the most part, Santeria and voodoo or voodoo, that's all about connecting with gods or the Loa. It's all about healing. It's not about cursing, not negative. But somebody would be would there be a sign? There'd be some symbol, some sign, a hex sign, something that says to you, you've been cursed. And from then on, you're going to do it to yourself. In some cultures, there might be a chemical component, something added to your food or something else you get to drink, talking about poison substances or other things that'll make you sick. So that can happen as well. But it's all, again, about you being a victim. Curses don't work if you're not a victim. If you're worried about psychically something happening to you, psychic attack, I want to just bring that up because people often talk about that being a curse, the curse thing. Here's the thing. We know from extensive research on psychic healing and also the placebo effect in medicine that if someone doesn't want to get better, their healing is going to take much longer or not even happen. Talking about healing from surgery, healing from an injury, your mental state affects your body. Consequently, if and we also know that psychic healing doesn't work if you don't want to get better. If you don't want to be affected, if you don't see that as the end result, even if you don't know about the psychic healing. All right. So it's your attitude as either a victim or just don't want anything to happen. That's important. So if healing doesn't work, psychic healing doesn't work, energy healing doesn't work, if you are against it or don't believe in it or don't want to actually get better, if the end result is that, psychic attack won't work unless you're willing or open to being the victim in that way. So we're pretty certain about this kind of thing. It's just a normal piece. The thing to worry about is the more physical stuff that can be done to you by somebody who's got it in for you. I will say that people feel that they're cursed sometimes when they are psychically a little bit open and they pick up, maybe there are people where they work or their family who don't like them. and they're always thinking negative thoughts about the person, and the person's now picking that up, that can feel like you're cursed. Again, the psychic protection thing that I just talked about works pretty well. All right, Shelley, would you know anything about this? Why some of the deceased I see can't see from the ankle and below, no feet? Oh, well, that's actually a good question. And often it's many people report not seeing apparitions anywhere below the knee, or it might just be they see them down to the knee or right below the knee or down below. Okay. So, and some people have been with this channel before know this pretty well. People have taken my classes, know this pretty well. I want you to close your eyes, Shelley, and I want you to picture yourself. And we've kind of primed it a little bit here. So get a picture in your mind and then open your eyes and think about that picture. Did you imagine yourself all the way down to your feet? Most people, and we kind of primed it again because you're asking that question. But when I've spoken to large groups, and I used to be on a college lecture tour every year. I've spoken to hundreds and sometimes a couple thousand students at one time. The vast majority, when I ask them this question that's going to come here, when I've asked them to visualize themselves, how many of you, well, first question I would normally ask is, how many of you saw yourselves naked? Because we don't typically, in most societies, we don't imagine or visualize ourselves naked. How come you haven't seen naked ghosts? All right, the answer is because our self-image, when you think about picturing yourself, we often look better than we actually look. My hair's a lot darker when I think of myself that way. It's the self-image that consciousness has, which is why ghosts often look much younger and healthier than they did when they die. There are so many cases on record of somebody who died of later in life, much later in life, but when they appear to their family, they look like they're 30 or younger in some respects as well. All right, second question then is, if you saw yourself with clothing on, the normal question I would ask is, how many of you saw yourselves down to your feet? And what would normally happen, first of all, almost everybody in the audiences would raise their hands when I said clothing. Always going to be a drunken person in the back, usually a frat guy, who says, "Oh, I'm naked." Only about 5% actually visualize themselves down to their feet. Of that 5%, I learned to ask, keep your hands up, how many of you buy a lot of shoes? And I'd say four out of the 5 people kept their hands up because their self-image, their fashion sense included their shoes. So that's the reason why, ghosts are people, they're human, and they just keep that self-image just not all the way down to their feet. Mariah says, I find fear of the unknown feeds the belief in curses. Absolutely. No question about it. Yes, Shelley, I have classes. Unfortunately, the classes are filled up now for the Rhine Center. If you go to, the link is actually in the channel page. I will put it in here as well. You can read all about the classes. Next set of classes will be August. We're going to have some short classes in August, and then classes again starting in the fall, or longer classes. All right. Okay, I can tell color of their clothes, eye, hair, and yeah, again, that's all about self-image as it happens. Even in dreams, I don't think we realize how old we are. That is true. I think that okay, it's kind of a stereotype, but it's pretty true that older guys don't think they're as old as we are. I don't think I'm as old as they are. I think I still am like around 30 years old. I wish my body reacted that way, but although some of my friends will say I probably still think I'm a teenager or younger because of the way I sometimes behave. All right. So anyway, the way we look at the idea of ghosts when people perceive them, the thing to know is that you're not seeing ghosts with your eyes. You're seeing them psychically or mentally, with your psychic senses. And when they see us, they don't have eyes to see. So, I mean, how could they see the world without some other form of perception? That's because they don't have physical senses. So we have to kind of look at it that way at this point in time, in general. So, all right. I'm kind of done talking about my topics. I am in the middle of teaching right now. I'm coming up to the fourth week of my parapsychology and anthropology class, which is always a really interesting topic of discussion. And because we talk about different beliefs around the world on different things, different topics. I've done a week on divination techniques. Last week we talked about healing and hexing. You can find books or find writings in anthropology about something called hex death or death by enchantment. And again, it's all about the victim in some respects and fear that does it. I even have an old book, old paperback from the 1960s, I think it is, called Scared to Death, where the author found cases where apparently the people died in fear. Their hearts, they had a heart attack or something else triggered that. We see that in horror films and other things quite often as well. We react emotionally, and emotions, our minds affect our bodies in that way. So, really interesting stuff. The other class I'm teaching is on the evidence for life after death. They're basically looking at the evidence and the topics that we're dealing with. So this week, actually, I'll be talking about apparitions as it happens. We're talking about that now. And then we go into reincarnation with these kids who remember previous lives and such. And then I'm not quite sure what I'm teaching in the summertime yet. That'll be a 4-week class. I'll be teaching one class, possibly 2 4-week. Those are our fun classes we usually teach in August. It's the entire month of August. And then our next classes start at the beginning of October. Okay, Shelley, having issues understanding what you're supposed to do with what some of them tell you. Join the club. I think a lot of psychics and mediums have that issue. Ask them questions. Get clarification if you're not sure about what you're supposed to do. What I hear from psychics and mediums, and Mariah's a medium, sometimes, and what I heard from Annette was sometimes they just want people to know that they're still around. So that may be the message. That may be what they want to do. Susanna says, I can remember you telling me that it's hard to be afraid of something and trying to analyze at the same time. That has been my experience. Well, I'm happy to have psychic experiences. When I go on investigations, I prefer to work with psychics and mediums, other people, because I'm trying to analyze and figure out what's actually going on. And it is that kind of dispassionate piece. In fact, one of the things we tell people in investigations is that we want them to start a journal or start jotting down a chronology or start looking at what's going on and giving details, because the more they try to look at or record their experiences with the activity, with the phenomena, the less emotional it becomes. And fear actually starts dropping away. So it's important. Mariah notices people also see spirits through your own bias lenses. That's absolutely right. And that's why some people who see a spirit freak out, because of their belief systems, that something's going to be negative, and they will interpret it that way too. Dean, what are some good ways to test your own psychic abilities? There are a number of different exercises you can try. I don't recall if I've uploaded this, but if not, I will upload a couple of, in fact, what I'll do is I'll upload some of the exercises and tests, kind of experiments you can do to test various types of psychic ability. In some respects, it's about really learning to get out of your own way, go with your instincts rather than trying to think about or label what you actually might perceive. I mean, you can use the old card guessing thing if you want, but it works better if you're doing pictures and you're kind of free associating. There are different applications of psychic ability, however, and one thing I can suggest, unfortunately, not available to everybody at this point, but I really am still hoping to get this back in print. Annette Martin wrote a workbook called Discovering Your Psychic World. I'm able to give a PDF of that to my students. You can contact me off book if you want through here, that you can. My email is available in the write-up of the channel, and ask me about it. We're trying to get it reprinted. It is a workbook that actually takes you through the process of testing and trying different things. But I will upload some suggestions, and we will post that link in the channel, or as a comment to this particular episode as well. I'll do that in the next couple days. So you have that. Some things to try. Is it safe to ask questions? I assume you mean of the ghosts. Absolutely. It is absolutely safe to ask questions. They may not want to answer them all, but that's like normal human beings. Definitely ask questions. At the very least, why are you here? Who are you? Always ask, what can I do for you? And if they're not clear in what they tell you you can do for them, ask again. What do you need? What do you actually need me to do or say, or what's happening here? But actually ask that. What do you think recorded ghostly voices? Two things here. That's electronic voice phenomena. And EVP, which is by definition voices created inside the device, not acoustical voices that are created. Because again, just like the visual, ghosts don't have an acoustical or a sound, that kind of physical presence. There seem to be some really good ones that come through, but they are backed up by people's experiences that there's actually somebody there. So much of what I see, especially through the TV shows and ghost hunter groups, they go to a supposedly haunted place, they get voices, no other indication there's a spirit present, none whatsoever. And I have to wonder two things. Number one, are they causing or creating the voices? Because the voice by a spirit would have to be created through mind over matter, or psychokinesis, as we call it. And we know that living people can affect devices. We have more data on that than we have that ghosts can do that. So it could be that the operators are actually causing the voice, especially, again, when you have no other indication. The other thing is, we talked about earlier, the spirits who just kind of visit. And how do we know that the spirit who might be affecting that recording device is actually connected to the location, or just simply knew that you found out that you were going to be there and trying to communicate with somebody, and now they're trying to communicate? We don't know. There's also an awful lot of interpretation, and a lot of those EVPs are just not clear. Interesting, but you have to really look into them very carefully. John says, write a journal every time. Yeah, write in a journal every time you have a psychic event. Absolutely. Shelley, anyone else seen, when you say anyone else seen, one more than one together, actually being afraid, something else that enters and hold. Okay, I'm not quite sure. More than one at a time that come together. You mean more than one spirit at a time? Okay, you say, I have a male voice whispered hello in your left ear, and a female voice says your name out loud. It could just be that, again, when you open up to talk to spirits, when mediums open up to communicate, it's like putting the word out that I'm here to communicate, and spirits may try to communicate with you. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a medium doing a gallery reading, is to open up and get spirits hopefully connected to people who are in the room as well. All right, Malcolm, welcome. You've communicated with a dolphin by telepathy. You're asked to ask her to change her sexual behavior. Yeah, it's interesting. Dolphin communication is really interesting, and I highly recommend. I'm assuming you found books, the older books by John Lilly, who is well known in consciousness circles for doing research on consciousness itself in the 60s and 70s. And what's interesting is a lot of people in the consciousness world have no idea that Lilly also did research on dolphin communication with humans. I don't know that he ever wrote anything about dolphin telepathy or telepathy with a dolphin, but I've talked to people who have had experience like that. Their brains are more developed in some respects than ours. So definitely worth checking. That's pretty cool, Malcolm. Shelley, okay, let's see here. Yeah, so again, I just want to say that, if you're having regular experiences with spirits, you might want to look into getting some help coaching or training with mediums. But be really careful about that, because there's a lot of people who charge a lot of money and don't give you a lot of return in that world. All right, Susanna, you volunteered for Project Circe. Project was funded by, you want to say something more about that, Susanna? So I'm unfamiliar with Project Circe at all. Okay, let's see here. Just going to wait. Dolphin human communication, not psychic. Yeah, Lily mostly worked on trying to understand or get dolphins to actually communicate in closer language or responses that we could better understand. I heard some stuff that I can't say is absolutely true, but a friend growing up when I was in high school, one of my friend's dads knew Lily pretty well and actually reported, I talked to his dad about it, reported that one of the dolphins that Lily was working with was able to parrot English, to actually to say things in English. Very high pitched, but was able to say things. And I've heard things like that as well. Okay, share my thoughts on physical mediumship and associated seances. Well, honestly, two things. Number one, physical mediumship, especially as it is today, got to be really careful, because even some of the ones that might have some legitimate abilities seem to like to do fraud too. And there's really no good way to research these folks, because they want or need it to be in the pure darkness. Many of the mediums, even when they've offered themselves up for study, have absolutely said no night shot cameras, because it'll hurt the spirits. So we have a real problem trying to determine that. The one session that I attended by a medium, there was absolute fraud there. No question in my mind. Some stuff might have been real there, but I also know there was some stuff that was actually fraudulent. So the biggest problem I've got with physical mediumship, though, is it's not, to me, an absolute indicator of life after death. You know, rarely do they come through with information. They have a control spirit who then proves to everybody that the spirit world is real by moving things around and making physical things happening in the room. How do we know that's really a spirit? It could either be it's as likely, if not more likely, it's the person, the medium, going into some sort of altered state, and their unconscious mind is putting through this information, and that's the unconscious moving things around, like in a poltergeist case. So it's really difficult to say that there's anything going on there, and that there can be really good shows if the person's entertaining and they're not too long in general. There is a recording of Japanese guy on his demise on Mount Fuji, and just before his death, there was a ghostly voice saying, "Don't come." I see a lot of stuff online. It may be a real thing. I mean, maybe very well be a real EVP. Not easy to know for sure. I mean, was he alone? Could someone else have been there who said that? I mean, there's any number of things we have to look at to determine if it's legit. Shelley had 5 to 6 standing in a corner looking at you, then something like a huge dark shadow appeared next to me. I looked over, the other ones had dropped their heads, held hands. They were scared of the thing. It seems to be the case that certain people who are seen as apparitions have this weird self-image of themselves, or there's a perceptual problem of picking them up. We've had cases with bullies or a-holes, so to speak, and sometimes other spirits may not want to be around them, but dropped their heads and held hands, were scared of the thing, do the psychic protection, just blast them out of the room. That's pretty much it. I would definitely suggest that you look up Joe Scheel, who Tina is mentioning, the NY Erds. Joe Scheel is one of the best mediums for the Forever Family Foundation. He is one of the best teachers out there on mediumship. He's absolutely legit and an incredibly good guy. Look him up. You can find his contact information at foreverfamilyfoundation.org if you can't find him. Joseph Scheel. Okay. Malcolm, you interviewed Lily and attended his workshops. Follow him that's very cool. Very, very cool, Malcolm. Love to hear about that. I was very much interested in dolphins when I was a kid, and even through college, for that matter. Liz, when you're working with energy healers, you can hear their energy. With Ed Edwards, you can hear through electronic interference. So if entities are an energetic phenomena, it makes sense. Yeah, we don't know what entities are made out of because we don't know what consciousness is made out of. Although we do know that psychic phenomena, psychic abilities can interfere, can interact with energetic, with energy, with electromagnetics, with other stuff. It's not that they are that it is electromagnetic, but definitely can interact with it to some extent. Esalen Institute. Would you believe marine mammalogists curse his name to this day for ruining interspecies communications? Really interesting. That I did not know. Any physical mediumship phenomena must have a purpose and relevance. Regurgitation seems to be all the rave. Yeah, that is true. The folks who have seen a couple physical mediums, the entities who come through, honestly, don't say anything that really gives identity for that person. The one we saw, who I know Mariah also saw, his control spirit was a man named Hans Bender, who was a parapsychologist in life. And in the 4-hour session, which was way too long, there wasn't a single thing that Hans Bender said that connected at all to what I knew about his life or about parapsychology. So maybe it was another spirit pretending to be a parapsychologist. Who knows? Yeah, Liz is referring to EVP. Sure. He was alone because this is back to the guy on Mount Fuji. He was alone because it said not to be the month to climb Mount Fuji. Interesting. Yeah, it would be. That's an interesting thing. I mean, I've been witness to places that have activity and some really good EVP, and we've even had some of it analyzed, the voice analyzed through some significantly advanced sound equipment and audio analysis, and it's different than actual acoustical sound. So there's some really interesting stuff there. Okay, we're kind of coming down to the wire. We're about 8 minutes left. Spiritualist Church, Journey Within. Yeah, so the Journey Within, is it journeywithin.org, I think? Journey Within is the name of the Spiritualist Church. Joe is now the minister. There are some other tutors he has. At some point, I may be teaching a class or two through him as well. Joe and I have been talking about that every so often. But Joe is, like I said, he's a great person to follow up with because he is a really good teacher, as it happens. All right. Am I familiar with the show Reality Check with Ross Coulthard? I think you mentioned this to me, Paul, at one point. I have not. I'm a busy guy. I don't have time to listen as much to all these other podcasts as I'd like. It makes it really difficult for me. Between teaching and grading, full-time work, and some other stuff that I've got going on, sometimes I just like to chuck it all and read an old pulp novel or comic books. That's all I want to do sometimes. All right. Okay, Jody. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jody. So Shelley said, just come across this. Yeah, I mean, Shelley, feel free to come every time we do one of these. I'll mention again what I said at the very beginning, that the next session is on June 9th. Following that, it will be June 23rd. And then we'll have to, there's going to be one in early July, but starting in mid-July, I'm going to have to shift it a week due to a conference that I'm going to. All right. Yeah, I think maybe, Malcolm, we possibly are. All right. So let me just see if there's any last pieces here. Susanna, there's an odd story. Let's see. You saw a framed print of a dolphin blowing an air ring. Several years later, moved to California from Colorado and didn't know that Cersei the dolphin was, I assume, that was that dolphin. Interesting. Subject of the print. Yeah. There have been psychics who have talked about doing dolphin communication or going to like Marine World and communicating with dolphins and others. I've talked to people over the years. I actually find that a lot more believable than full paragraphs that a pet psychic says the dog or cat is thinking. mainly, we do know how highly intelligent dolphins are, and that there is a culture there. Same thing with whales as well. And as I mentioned, studies of the, so we have our intelligence based on the kind of the surface of our brain, all those folds that you see in pictures of the brain. That the folding actually gives more surface area to the brain. And also looking at the brain's weight versus the brain to body ratio of weight. Dolphins have actually a greater number of folds in their brains, more surface area, and a greater brain to body ratio, which is pretty interesting when you think about it. So the thing is that they evolved and live in a completely different alien environment. When anybody, one of the reasons why NASA has been involved in dolphin communication at all, or even interested in it, is because it is a good example of trying to communicate with an alien species, although they're not extraterrestrial in that way. So, Shelley, your profile pic is actually from the day you swam with dolphins. Cool. Orcas sleep, but they only sleep one hemisphere at a time because they are conscious breathers. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, well, I didn't bring up dolphins. Somebody else brought up dolphins. I brought them up because of John, because of what went on here, and more than anything else. Okay. Yeah. So again, take a look. There's that link to the Ryan Education Center, a good source. There are, I think, I'm pretty sure. Talk to my producer here, Graveyard Grog. Don't we have those documents that I put up already that people can kind of pull down? I think we have the links somewhere, but I'll have to add them again to the comments to this particular session, because there are documents. There's a document on good resources that I've got. I'll add that to what I put up tomorrow as well. All right, we're down to 2 minutes. The next session, if you think of any questions between now and then, there is one of the documents. If you can show the other one that's there, I think we have that other document, which is the resources list. But there are links that we have. Yeah, that's the topics list that's there. We've got. So these are things I can certainly talk about. And I'll put the links up again. There's some video on YouTube about listening to AM radio. I think it's the same one, so don't worry about it. We'll just put the links in. So my email is either askprofparanormal@gmail.com or profparanormal, as in professor, @gmail.com. Feel free to email me if you like. If you have any topics you want to suggest for next time, let us know, and I can start off with them like I did tonight. And that's about it for tonight. I think we're coming to a close here. I want to thank you all for attending. We had a nice group tonight. Tell your friends, please like and subscribe. Tell your friends to come back and like and subscribe. And remember, the recordings are here, going back actually, we're almost at our 1-year anniversary. So the recordings are there under the live tab to go all the way back. This is episode 24. You can find all the other ones. Sometimes I get similar questions every time. You'll see some of the same names in the chat. But thank you, everybody, for coming. And I hope to see you here in 2 weeks on June 9th. Good night.